is Lewis Hamilton a misunderstood hero all this time? In the days following the Qatar Grand Prix, hindsight has shown that the first lap incident is not as simple as it looks. It turns out that George Russell and his small-mindedness should be blamed for his crash with his legendary teammate, at least according to a few experts. The conflict involving the Mercedes drivers was a highly debated moment last Sunday. At the beginning of the race, the much-anticipated clash between the two drivers finally unfolded. Lewis Hamilton pulled off an impressive move from third place on the grid, positioning himself alongside George Russell and Max Verstappen as they entered Turn 1. Hamilton, who had chosen the soft tire as opposed to the medium selected by the other two drivers, aimed to leverage the superior grip of his choice by attempting an outside maneuver, but he made the mistake of cutting in too early, resulting in contact with his teammate's left front wheel. This incident led to both drivers spinning out, and Hamilton had to retire from the race immediately. Richard Bradley, former Le Mans 24 Hours LMP2 winner, shared his insights on the incident while appearing on the On Track GP podcast. Initially, after the collision, both Hamilton and Russell took to the team radio to assign blame to each other. Russell pressed on in the race and managed to recover, ultimately finishing in 4th place when the checkered flag waved. During this time, Hamilton was out of the race, affording him the opportunity to review the replays and take responsibility for instigating the collision. Bradley made note of this, saying, "I think it was an interesting one, because we had first-hand evidence from the sprint on Saturday just how effective the soft was at the beginning of the race. I mean, it was massively faster than the medium. Plus, also, we had the drop-off. Now there's absolutely no question that Lewis squeezed George and didn't leave George enough room. Absolutely. No question." While Bradley attributed the primary fault for the collision to Hamilton's on-track actions, he also pointed out that Russell could have exercised more caution in his driving, saying that if George saw the bigger picture, he could have ended up on top. He said, "I think that it was still going to be a long shot for George to be able to overtake Verstappen. George could have backed out of that, slotted in behind Verstappen, and then waited for Lewis and Verstappen to have their inevitable side-by-side battle, and then maybe pick up the pieces. So, whilst it was 100% Lewis's fault, and he left George with no option, I do think that George could have looked maybe at the bigger picture. This 100% would have been discussed in a strategy meeting before the race. Whenever you have teammates starting near each other, you always talk about the various scenarios. As I said, 100% Lewis's fault, but I expect, as a bigger picture, the situation could have been managed a little bit better." Podcast host Rachel Downey also shared her thoughts on the matter, saying that Russell should have been more mindful of his strategy to allow Hamilton to overtake him as swiftly as possible. She said, "Hamilton, being the sportsman that he is, has come out and apologized. But, and there's a big but here, Lewis started on softs. The incident here starts before the contact. Surely the team had some kind of strategy meeting and George knew. Okay, if Lewis is starting on softs, he's going to be faster off from the start. I don't understand. Why did Russell put himself in that position? I do find Russell a little bit arrogant if I'm absolutely honest. He goes on about, it's for the team, but I don't think it is. But then, you look at when it was, say Hamilton and Alonso back in the day, I see a lot of in George Russell and Hamilton at the start, when it's got that aggression. Since then, there's been reports that there was a strategy meeting. So, therefore, did George not take that on board? I guess we'll never really know, because things do seem like they are falling apart slightly within Mercedes. To make matters worse for Russell, Mercedes went on a side with Hamilton following his confession about the crash in Qatar. The team emphasized that Lewis Hamilton's willingness to accept responsibility showcases his strong character. Mercedes Motorsport Communications Director Bradley Lord, who assumed some of the responsibilities in the absence of team boss Toto Wolff, had this to say about Hamilton. Lewis doing that, and being able to have the strength of character to come out and speak as he has done, shows that champions aren't just made in the winning moments, but also in the most difficult ones. And it speaks volumes to his strength of character that he is able to do that. Even though the collision occurred between the two teammates, the Silver Arrows insist that it won't divert their focus from their championship objectives for this year. Lord added that, there's no intention for them to come together on track, but they have done. That's never our goal, and they're both very aware of the team's objective, and they want to work together to get us to second in the championship and secure that P2. The debrief is ongoing as I'm sitting here, and I have absolutely no doubt it's the same conversation they're having there as well. And while talking about the incident itself, Lord's thoughts on the matter is as follows. We discussed it in the morning. It was a scenario that we'd been through. Obviously, they had different start tire performance. In the moment, they just ran out of space. George had nowhere to go. Lewis tried to take his line. We saw what happened. Unfortunately, these things can happen. You can't program everyone, even with a discussion beforehand. There's no denying it. A power struggle is underway within Mercedes. In one corner, we have a 7-time world champion, boasting 103 Grand Prix victories, a formidable competitor to all, and a driver who, from a statistical standpoint, holds the title of the greatest the sport has ever witnessed. In the opposite corner, we have the challenger, an emerging star who's being groomed to assume the mantle as the face of Mercedes' future, and the driver expected to carry forward the legacy of greatness that Hamilton has instilled within the team. Hamilton, having achieved unparalleled success in F1, finds himself with very little left to prove to anyone, but the magnetic allure of F1 glory is so compelling that he has pledged his future to Mercedes, driven by the quest for more accolades. On the other hand, Russell now has the opportunity to demonstrate to everyone that he can effectively embrace the challenge of competing against a driver of Hamilton's caliber. Hamilton is determined to keep himself from moving down the priority list at Mercedes, even though it's difficult to imagine such a scenario ever unfolding. He is actively striving to reaffirm that Mercedes remains his team. Toto Wolff faces a challenging task in maintaining harmony at Mercedes in the aftermath of the collision involving Hamilton and Russell to prevent any escalating tensions. One has to wonder, could all of this have been avoided? Lucky for us, Sky Sports reporter Ted Kravitz wondered the same thing. Speaking from the paddock after the race, he said, "The frustrating thing is, as well as being completely unnecessary, had they given each other a bit of room, it wouldn't have happened, as well as being frustrating because the car had pace, as well as Mercedes believing they would have been quicker than McLaren, and it would have been a double podium. It wouldn't have been Lando and Oscar, it would have been George and Lewis on the podium." As well as throwing away a double podium behind Max Verstappen, they had talked about the fact that Lewis was starting on the soft tire, the quicker tire, off the line and might be quicker than George into the first corner. They talked about it in the Mercedes briefing in the morning. How avoidable was all of this? I want to know. Bradley Lord said we discussed it. If you discussed it, maybe George would have thought, Lewis will be in a couple of laps. It's not George's fault. Or Lewis thinking, I'm ahead of George. He knows I'm on the soft tire. Maybe I'll make it extra special safe, then take a wider line into turn 1. It adds to the frustration, especially, as George and Lewis underlined, everyone has put in a real shift at Mercedes, putting in the late hours. What do you think? Do you agree with the pundits who blame George Russell for the unfortunate disaster? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell for the hottest F1 news.